Hello, hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with our podcast host Keegan. And today we have a very special guest, and his name is Brett. He is a 48-year-old, recently retired physician and surgeon whose personal reputation and professional career was almost completely derailed when a hidden opiate addiction came to surface. So, Brett, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Keegan. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. So that's one heck of a thing to have derail. I mean, that is a prestigious position, isn't it? Being a surgeon, of all things.
Well, it took a lot of years to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose it's prestigious. Yeah, but like we were talking about before we started recording, I've been to rehab 2 different times, and I always have so much more in common with the guys in rehab
Mm-hmm.
than I don't have in common with them. There's always such a diverse, a diverse backdrop of backgrounds and stuff when you go to a facility like that. And
Oh yeah.
and I always get on well with the guys. I mean, the 2 times I've been.
Well, that's really good that you've gotten along with the guys because while you're in rehab, there's really nothing else you can do. I should know. I've been there myself for 9 months in one stint. So that was one heck of a ride. So I can't imagine going twice.
So you're one and done. Good job.
Yeah. Well, if you went through the rehab I went through, the one is enough. Trust me.
Yeah, 9 months
Yeah.
sounds like a pretty good stint.
Yeah. Christian military rehab. So it was a lot. Let me tell you, it wasn't. I didn't really have expectations, so I guess I can't say it met them or didn't meet them at all. But enough about that. Why don't you tell us about your story? Like, where did you pick up that addiction? It took you a whole lot of years to become a surgeon. Were you battling it the whole time?
No, I wasn't. And so I'll start kind of it. I'll tell my story here, and
Okay.
I'll try to cinch it down to about 10 minutes. But
No, take your
so
time. Take your time. It's
okay,
fine. This
some
is
of the
your
stuff,
story.
some of the stuff in the beginning might sound kind of random, but it all makes sense toward the end. But anyway,
Okay.
so I was born and raised in Baton Rouge,
Mm.
Louisiana, and my dad was a professor of mathematics at LSU, the local university,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom was an English professor, and my sister was an attorney. She was 10 years older than me. So,
Oh
I
wow.
mean, man, by the time I was 8 years old, my sister was already out of the house in
Mm-hmm.
college, in law school, different cities. So we were not super close.
Yeah.
But the point is as long as I can remember, my upbringing was centered around academics and achievement
Mm-hmm.
and excellence and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so that was the norm. That was par for the course for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do want to say that my parents never actively pressured me to 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 get all A's, for example, or they just wanted me to do my best.
Yeah.
But since their best seemed to always be the best, that's kind of
Mm.
always what I shot for.
Yeah.
And so, other than that, pretty normal childhood. I was a good student. I was a pretty good athlete as well. Again, that's another area. My dad, first of all, he's almost 6'9".
Mm-hmm.
He played college basketball, so he's physically imposing, in
Mm.
addition to intellectually imposing.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of sports, a lot of studying, academics. Other than that, pretty normal childhood.
Mm.
So went to college at LSU. Actually
Oh.
majored in history because I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Like, I mean, and I was kind of worried because some people have an idea. Hey, maybe I'll go to law school, or maybe I'll do this, or maybe I want to own my own McDonald's franchise or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I had no idea. So
Mm.
at the very tail end of my freshman year of college, I got sick. I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a cancer of
Mm.
the lymph nodes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was a 16-month battle. I had to drop out of school. And ultimately that culminated in a bone marrow transplant.
Oh boy.
So almost a year and a half dealing with that. But
Mm-hmm.
of the many silver linings that came out of that, one was that it pointed me in the direction of being a physician. So
Ah.
double majored after that, history and pre-med, and went to med school and became a doctor because of that experience. And during that experience, lymphoma in and of itself is not
Mm-hmm.
very painful. I had a ton of surgeries and biopsies and stuff. But my point is, that was when I was first exposed to opiates.
Mm.
And so I was 19, 20 years old, was given opiates for a variety of reasons throughout my 16-month cancer ordeal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I did like the way they made me feel, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't the best feeling ever. And it never occurred to me to take them when I wasn't in pain. And when
Mm.
the ordeal was over, I mean, who knows what happened to the pain medication bottle, because I didn't finish them. It just never occurred to me, even though I liked the way they made me feel.
Mm-hmm.
So, once we fast forward and I start my addiction, you'll see that, well, anyone who knows anything about addiction, especially if you have a personal relationship with addiction, you know that it's a lot different
Yeah.
than that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so go to medical school, do well in medical school, matched to a residency in Houston, Texas, in the Texas Medical Center.
Oh, cool.
I was a ear, nose, and throat physician and surgeon, so trained in that for another 5 years after med school.
Oh boy.
Got a job inside the Texas Medical Center, which is, you mentioned prestigious. I guess it is somewhat prestigious. It is the largest medical center in the world,
Oh wow.
and there are only two private practices inside the medical center. All the other practices are huge tertiary care academic big conglomerations. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you live in Houston and you just have a cold, you'd come see us.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to some more complicated matters. But anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very busy practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a go-getter. So within 2 years, I was really up and running at 100% capacity.
Oh wow.
Um, and and this is around the time where my wife and I, had two children.
Mm-hmm.
They were both adopted uh, because of the cancer treatment,
Mm-hmm.
chemotherapy, and everything. I couldn't have kids
Oh.
biologically, so my wife and I adopted two wonderful kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was living my dream, you know, great job. We lived in the suburbs, great wife, loving
Mm-hmm.
wife, two kids, two dogs. I mean, it was the picture perfect. It was what I pictured when I was a kid, when I was thinking of the ideal life. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, for sure.
And at about year 5 or 6 of being on my own and practicing medicine,
Mm-hmm.
I started to feel an emotion that I had really never felt before, and that was boredom.
Ooh, that's not a
Which,
good one.
yeah, that's not a good one.
Mm-mm.
I mean, boredom is a trigger for, I won't say most people. I'll just speak for myself. Boredom is a huge trigger for me.
Right here too.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't boredom in, I think, the way most people think of it. It was kind
Mm-mm.
of a lack of fulfillment sort of boredom with my
Mm-hmm.
job.
Ooh.
And it just had become monotonous,
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, it was 1,000% my fault, because from year one, my partners would tell me, "You gotta take more time off. You should be taking at least 3 to 4 weeks of vacation every year.
Mm-hmm.
Take a day off once a month," just because they told me that constantly, and I didn't listen. So
Oh.
all in all, I worked almost nonstop for 10 years. But around year 6 is when this lack of fulfillment boredom started to creep in.
Mm-hmm.
And, I binge drank in college,
Mm-hmm.
but I studied hard, so it wasn't ever a problem.
Yeah, balanced
Um,
out.
Yeah, and I was a social drinker. After that, I did not
Mm-hmm.
really drink. Maybe once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks when LSU was playing football or whatnot. But my routine on Friday afternoons, I would come home,
Mm-hmm.
hang out by the pool. I would open two Bud Light limes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I would start my Friday evening. And I would maybe drink 4 or 5 in total.
That's not bad.
Well,
Yeah.
one afternoon, a drug rep brought by some
Oh.
hydrocodone-based cough medicine samples. Okay, and I
Same.
was like, and I immediately remembered what that
Mm-hmm.
felt like when I was 20 years old, undergoing cancer chemotherapy. And I said, I wonder, maybe I'll just, instead of my two Bud Light limes this Friday afternoon, I'm just going to take one of these cough medicine samples and see how that works out.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike the first go round with opiates
Mm-hmm.
back in 1996, when I took this cough medicine sample, it was the best, most euphoric feeling I had ever felt in my entire life.
And that's dangerous.
And it was interesting because I was not expecting that. I was expecting what I remembered it to be like
Mm-hmm.
back when I was 19 and 20.
Mm-hmm.
But because there's more to addiction than just the biochemistry of taking the medication, or in my case, the medication, the drug,
Mm-hmm.
um, that one decision eventually led to a 6-year, very gradually progressing disease that had me, by the end, it had me stealing my patient's pain medication
Oh
um,
man.
to take it so I could get through the day. That's where it ended up.
Wow.
So, even though, I had this prestigious job, and I'm putting prestigious in air quotes here,
Mm-hmm.
and it took me 13 years to train for it and 13 years of studying. None of that was even close to enough to balance out the addiction, and
Mm.
it took over everything.
Right.
Eventually, I lost my job when a patient complained that his pain medication wasn't working. The state medical board got involved.
Oh man.
Wife ended up giving me an ultimatum about treatment, so
Mm-hmm.
I went to a 90-day inpatient rehab, and you know, there starts recovery.
Wow. Holy cow.
Yeah.
That is one heck of a backstory. Thank you for sharing that. Seriously, that is rough because I can relate to so much of that that it's not even funny, you know?
Right.
And the thing is that you said that you've been to rehab twice. So you went once. That's where recovery started. So how did recovery start? What did early recovery look like for you?
Yeah. Great question. And I really like, it's emotionally taxing for me to talk about my story in active disease.
Mhm.
Um, Although I don't mind doing it, especially if someone who needs to hear it is going to hear it. But I
Mhm.
love talking about recovery because even though it was the most difficult thing I ever did, and that includes the cancer battle, by the way, um,
Mhm.
it's all positive. It's all ultimately led to positivity in my life.
Mhm.
So, I did not enjoy rehab. I
Mhm.
wasn't going back there at Christmas years later just to hang out with the fellas. But I learned a lot, and I was able to appreciate at the time how much I needed it, how much I
Mhm.
learned about myself. My character defects, my character strengths, and I was taught and I learned to understand why I did so many of the crazy stuff that I did. I was very helpful.
Mhm. Yeah.
And of course, every time I would get excited about learning something, it was a 12-step based program, so they would remind me
Mhm.
that it's education is not going to do it for you. Education alone isn't going to keep you sober. This
No.
isn't a test, Brett, is what they would tell me, because I brought this doctor med school studying attitude in there, like I want to get an A+ in rehab. I want to graduate with honors from rehab. um, and they would remind me constantly that that's not the way it works. So,
Uh-oh.
but yeah, I enjoyed rehab, and it was tough though. I mean, when I left the bubble of rehab,
Mm.
that soft, comfortable, uh, fuzzy, snuggly bubble of rehab, and went back into the real world. I
Mm.
was glad that I was there for 90 days. Let me put it that way, because
Yeah.
the world I did not find to be a nice place. And
Mm.
another thing I
Mm.
realized in early recovery, and if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, but it surprised me.
Mm.
Nobody gives a about you and that you're in early recovery. You're not
No.
going to get congratulations from the Circle K clerk. You know what I mean? Like, nobody cares. And so you lose a little bit of that, constant positivity and reinforcement in rehab. So you better have your what together,
Mm.
or at least together when you wake up in the morning, one day at a time.
Mm.
Don't stray from everything. I'm not giving advice. I'm saying what I was telling myself every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Do your meditation, read from the big book, do what you're supposed to do the next right thing, basically.
Mm. Yeah.
Do the next right thing, and you'll be okay. But it was not easy. It was simple,
Mm.
but it wasn't easy.
Yep. And that's the way the 12 steps work, right? They're simple to do. Well, they're simply laid out. They can be difficult to do depending on your willpower, really, have your desperation power, I should say. But you do bring up a whole lot of key points that just resonate with me. And the first one is you had mentioned addiction being the disease that it is. And I like to refer to addiction as the disease of choice because I started with the choice to use or drink. Along the way, it goes away. And then I have to get desperate enough to make that choice again to get out of it. However, that may looks different for everyone, even say the same person two, three, 4 or 5 times, however many times they need to go down that road. But it's a paradox, right? I start with the choice, I lose the choice, but I have to get the choice back by making that choice. And that is the hardest choice to make, right? But it was also at the same time the easiest one, and it's because of one key factor, and that's the gift of desperation. Would you agree?
I would agree that yes, the gift of desperation is a blessing. It's interesting that you asked that, because I really did not have the gift of desperation, unfortunately,
Mm,
when I went to rehab the first time. But
mm,
thank goodness, and I put it like this: the gift of desperation is a gift, but my power was at work already, even though I didn't even believe in a higher power when I got to rehab.
mm.
My higher power was at work, because although I did not have the gift of desperation, I did have the gift of willingness.
Ooh.
And I mean, for someone who had the grandiosity and the ego that I was working with at that time when I was active in my disease, for me to be able to admit that I had a problem that I couldn't fix on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, Brett, you might know a lot about ear, nose, and throat surgery, but you don't know jack, what about addiction and rehab. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was willing from day one. That was the gift that I had.
And that is a huge gift to have too, because if you're not willing, then none of it works,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know? Because that is literally step one, is admitting, but I think before that you have to be willing to admit, right? And if you're not willing, then it's not going to happen. But it even says in the steps, such as step 8, I don't have to do anything besides become willing to make amends. Step 9 is where I make the list. Step 8 is saying, yeah, I think I'll try it out, you know?
That's right. Yeah.
So,
And I was
um,
kind of, you're absolutely right. Because right in the beginning, I was a little bit cynical about becoming willing being a step. step 6 and 7 being their
Mm-hmm.
own steps. I had some. I was a little cynical, but then I learned that being willing is hard. It can be hard,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
it in a lot of ways it's a skill that needs to be practiced and massaged a little bit
Mm-hmm.
in order to work, effectively. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting way to put that. Massaging the willingness, kind of like a muscle. Um, and now that you mention it, I've never really thought about it like that, but it makes a lot of sense because you have to kind of push the limits on it, right? And then you have to kind of relax a little bit too. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. Um, so the first time that I thought about something being a learned skill that you
Mm-hmm.
had to practice or massage
Mm-hmm.
was with meditation. So I started
Ooh.
meditating in rehab, and I just sucked at it when I first started. I mean, I could not blank out things in my head. If I tried to do it in nature, I tried to do it with the bird singing. I tried to do it with a reading.
Mm-hmm.
I tried many, many different ways, and I just seemed to suck at it way more than most people. I just could not clear my head. Um, but I was willing to continue to give it a
Mm.
chance, and so eventually I got better at clearing my head.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I left rehab on around day 86, I mean, I was actively looking forward to meditating because I always left meditation feeling better than when I went into meditation.
Mm.
But it took a lot of practice.
Yeah, it sure does. Meditation is one of those key tools that I use daily, you know, and there's different ways to go about it, and I love meditation for that. Um, so,
But what you were saying with willingness, it's a little
mhm,
different in that I had never thought about it the way you thought about it, but in terms of practicing and moving a muscle and then letting it relax, I did have to practice my willingness, which is basically, when I say that, it's basically me kind of fostering my relationship with my higher power so that
mhm,
I could trust my higher power
mhm,
that he had my best interest at heart.
yeah,
So a lot of the practice was forming a relationship with my higher power. But like you
mhm,
said, you have to kind of pull back and relax because I tried to force it more
mhm,
than once, and for me, none of this stuff worked if
mhm,
I was trying to force it to work. It really
mhm,
had to come around organically and naturally. And so, like you said, massaging, uh, there's some push and some pull involved with that.
mhm. Well, I'm sorry that I took massaging a skill a little bit different.
Yeah.
I don't think I had actually heard that term before, so you learn something new every day. But you did bring up one very important part in working 12-step recovery, and that's working a relationship with your higher power. And that a lot of people always say, like, it can be anything, it can be the doorknob. Well, my sponsor finally gave me the answer to why it cannot be a doorknob because it'll always turn on me. And
Nice.
I was like, oh, that's why.
Man, he was quick. He or she, well, yeah, he was quick, huh?
Yeah, he definitely was, and he's a great sponsor. I don't know what I'd do without him. Do you still work with a sponsor?
I do not. When I moved, I had a sponsor in the Houston area, and
Mm-hmm.
then I moved to Louisiana, and then I did get another sponsor, and then I moved again within Louisiana to
Mm.
Baton Rouge about 7 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I have not gotten a new sponsor in town. I still communicate with my other sponsor,
Oh, that's
but I
good.
really need to get one that's here in the city.
Yeah.
But in terms of communicating with a sponsor, yes, I still do. Not as much as I should, I will say. Um, but he's still in my life.
Well, that's good. And I mean, working with your sponsor is just like working the steps, right? it's a personal relationship. It's different for everyone. And I know for myself, whenever I was living in sober living, there were some guys that were like, "Yeah, I call my sponsor every day, and this and that and another." And then I'm sitting there like, I call my sponsor once a week, maybe. And so I called my sponsor and I was like, "Man, I'm so sorry I don't call you every day." And he was like, "Don't."
Right. I was going to say some sponsors like that and some don't. So
Hmm.
it's,
Yeah.
I guess it's sponsor specific.
Hmm. And everyone has a different dynamic with their sponsor, and every program has a different dynamic too. So NA, AA, CA, any other of the A's, they can have different feels for everything because alcoholics and NA people just have different lifestyles outside of the recovery room, and that's just kind of how it goes. And so you kind of find yourself in a weird position of sorts because you have this title that you've earned that a lot of people look up to, but you're right here with us, you know? Um, and honestly, I think that that's really awesome, you know? Because it's just, we are very similar, you know? And it's something that I don't know how else to explain it right now, but it just goes to show that we're human. You know, I want so many people to realize that I'm just a human. I made a mistake and it took me out for a while, you know?
Yep.
And and that's the thing too is that I didn't know it was a mistake. Had I known it was going to be a mistake, I wouldn't have done it. Would you?
No, no, I would not have experimented with that cough medicine sample instead of my Bud Light limes.
Hmm.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is that a lot of people really think that we chose addiction, right? Do you think that you chose it after a certain point? Because you made an ultimatum. Well, rather, you were presented an ultimatum, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you didn't actually choose addiction, even though you may have gone to rehab a second time. To me, that shows that you're still willing to work recovery more. Don't you think?
I suppose so. Yeah. And gosh, in all the years and all the times I've thought about this, I haven't really thought about that basic concept, which is, do I feel that for myself addiction was a choice? I do not, because like you said, had I known what was going to happen when I first started taking opiates, I would have never taken, I would have
Hmm.
never started. But once you do start, and this is another thing, in my personal opinion,
Hmm.
um, all of recovery and the entire 12-step program, all of it is centered around giving me the tools to avoid taking the first drink. Because once I take the first drink, it's done. It's over. It's
Hmm.
over. They're not all, for me, all the tools in the world aren't going to work.
Mm-mm.
So it's all about having a strong enough relationship with your higher power and or your recovery,
Hmm.
and having enough trust in the process that you don't take that very first drink or pill or hit or whatnot.
Hmm. Yeah. And you make a huge, huge point because it's that first one, right? So whenever we talk about taking the first drink, the first hit, whatever it is, you make a very good point because one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. And for myself, I knew this early in recovery. Well, not early in recovery, early in known addiction because I was in addiction before I knew I was addicted.
Hmm.
Um, and whenever I knew I was addicted, I knew that if I took the first shot, if I took the first sip, any kind of alcohol past these lips, the floodgates opened. There was no stopping it whatsoever. And I I had only the choice of the first one. And I had a really, 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 really hard time telling that first one no. Because I know exactly what to tell myself to convince myself that I needed that, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
it's amazing how smart we get when it comes to the mental gymnastics involved with taking the first one.
yeah, it really is. Do you got any personal anecdotes that come to mind on that?
Well, I have a point that I thought of that I think
Yeah.
is invaluable for listeners. And again, it's just my personal experience, but I knew the dangers of taking the first drink or the first pill.
Hmm.
Um, and what happened to me, I think, is the worst possible thing that could have happened, which was when I took the first one, nothing happened. It,
Oh.
it was okay,
Hmm.
but I didn't get in any trouble. Nobody found out about it.
Hmm.
I didn't crash my car. I didn't do anything or suffer any negative consequences.
Hmm.
So obviously, since I didn't suffer any consequences, and one was okay but wasn't great, next time we'll do three. And so for me, the first one not being this horrible, terrible thing is bad because that
Hmm.
means I can keep doing it, basically.
Yeah.
So if listeners experience that, just know that that's a booby trap.
That's a really good point. That I wish I had a bad experience my first time drinking.
Right.
You know, I wish I had a bad experience with a lot of first times of things that I've had or done, but that's just the thing. I can't go back and say, well, redo. What I can do though is say, well, I've learned from my experience and I'm going to use it for the better. Uh, and like the big book says, after reviewing everything, I don't wish to shut the door on the past, but instead I'm going to use that for helping other people. And that's exactly what you're doing here. So I got to thank you on behalf of everyone that's going to hear this episode and everyone that's in active addiction, anyone that's in active recovery. Just thank you for being here and sharing your story.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I love telling my story, especially the recovery part.
Yeah, the recovery part's the fun part, isn't it?
Right. Yep. Yeah. But um, I think it's equally as important as
Mm.
the not so fun disease part.
Hmm. And I think, well, and that's the thing, you can't have one without the other. And so there is one thing that I do kind of disagree with you on, and that's the whole people don't give a damn if you're in recovery. And I only say this because the director at the Men of Nehemiah, where I went to rehab, he said in many times, he said, lead with your story, like lead with your testimony. And I never really thought about it. And in fact, whenever I first started working while I was still in rehab, I accidentally told people multiple times, like, hey, I'm an alcoholic, uh, recovering alcoholic, whatever. And people were like, congratulations. And I was like, oh, okay. But you are also right in the fact that some people really don't give a damn. But that's
Mm.
probably because they're dealing with it themselves or they know someone dealing with it, right?
Yeah.
And I do have to say that the overall view of recovery has increased. More people are accepting and saying, hey, you're in recovery, you're trying to do better with your life. Congratulations. Instead of, oh, you're in recovery, that means you've done bad things, stay away. you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. I think maybe why my perspective is like that is because the contrast between how I was treated when I had cancer versus when I had addiction was black
oh,
and white.
yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
so,
good.
yeah, I mean, you get cancer and you're like a hero automatically without doing anything. And
Hmm.
you're put on prayer lines and everyone's sending you food and get well wishes. And it is great. I'm telling you
Hmm.
that's kind of support
Hmm.
is invaluable, or at least it was for me.
Hmm.
But I didn't get any best wishes cards
Hmm.
for the addiction. Um, and
Hmm.
it's not good or bad. It's just different,
Yeah, it is different, but you raise a really, 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 really good point, though. What if people were to celebrate recovery like they were to be supporting or celebrating someone to beat cancer or someone that is actively battling cancer? You
Yeah,
know?
I think it would be a tremendous help to the
Hmm.
to the to whoever's sick. I really think it would be. Um, Society has a lot of room for improvement from that
Hmm.
standpoint. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, I think it would be great.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, though, is that recovery really does require community, right? So, do you have any recovery community that you are in touch with actively?
Yeah, I mean, I have a local AA groups, but I would say the most consistent community is I have, well, two in particular, but people from my very first rehab that I still communicate with.
Mm.
And they're almost like, I mean, they're not a sponsor. They have a different role, but in
Uh-huh.
terms of how I feel about them and how important they are in my life, they are equally as important as my sponsor, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Just about bouncing ideas off of or calling when you're struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and also calling when things are going great.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear when one of my buddies calls me just to say, "Man, things are going great. How are things with you?"
Mm-hmm.
That's always a nice phone call to get.
Yeah. And that is really important to celebrate the small things and the victories and not just the, man, I had a day, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta call for those too. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I agree. It's nice to get the positive ones. And I also I do want to mention that I had a very supportive, family, both
Mm-hmm.
immediate family and distant family, very supportive.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, not a lot of people have that either. Some people go through recovery all alone, and that must really, really, really suck. I was fortunate enough to have some friends and some family, but I mean, I'm still 6.5 hours away from my home where everyone I know is, so I'm still somewhat alone with my wife. So,
Yeah, it's
uh,
true.
and I'd have to say, like recovery has really shown me, or at least getting into recovery and getting out of active addiction has shown me who my true friends are, you
Hmm.
know, because some people were like, hey, he's in rehab, gone, bye. And then some people actually reached out and have checked up even after, So some people fall off, and I think it's for the better. Did you have any relationships kind of like that? The ones that kind of went away because you got into recovery or because you left an addiction behind?
Yeah, I will say when I was working, we had six I had five partners, so there were six of us working at this private practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been there for, you know, by the time I went to rehab, I had been there for 10 years.
Oh yeah.
And we were all good friends, and two or three of them, we would go to each other's kids' birthday parties. I mean, we were really close.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not an exaggeration what I'm about to say. Um, Once they terminated me from that position,
Mm-hmm.
not a single one of them answered a single text or phone call or email ever. And
Oh
that's
man.
to this day. Like just this last New Year's Eve, I texted my best friend in the group, just to say Happy New Year and I hope everything was well, and did not get a response. So yes, I definitely have experience with friends in air quotes,
Mm-hmm.
showing me, the relationship that they how they valued our relationship. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Um, when when it hit, yeah.
Yeah, that's really rough. I'm really sorry to hear that. And I'm sorry that it was such a harsh blow, too, because 10 years is a lot. I mean, that was the extent of my active addiction. So, yeah, I mean, that is a good portion of life that you shared with someone.
Right.
And it does show that people have this view of not recovery, but addiction as being a moral standpoint, you know? So that's one of those things that I'd like to help end the stigma on is that addiction is not a moral standpoint. And it goes right back to the whole if I knew that I was going to become an alcoholic, I wouldn't have picked up a beer or liquor in the first place,
Hmm.
you know?
Right.
But that's the thing is that it wasn't presented to me as, hey, this is going to be. It's a possibility, or not even that. With alcohol, it's celebrated, you know. So that was one of the bad things about alcohol. And anything else, though, can be just as demonized. Just and that's the thing too is that you fell into pharmaceuticals. And a lot of people think pharmaceuticals are safe because they're prescribed by doctors. But oh, so many people get addicted to those every year. And I mean, I just have to say you're honestly probably lucky that you're out alive, you know?
Yeah. And I've always felt blessed or lucky that
Blessed is better.
alcohol is not my DOC, because if I could just go pick up a hydrocodone pill at the Circle K, uh, that would be more difficult. Let me put it that way.
Hmm.
So I always admire. I find a reason to admire almost everyone in recovery, but alcoholics I admire because the accessibility is there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one. So there was this argument that happened while I was in rehab, and it was over who was the better person. Because yeah, I'm sure you heard this argument. Did you? Uh,
But between drug addicts and alcoholics,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I've had similar discussions.
yeah. And that was the thing is that I broke one up because I said, "Hey guys, like we're in the same place. Like it doesn't matter." But I mean, to be fair, some of the points that they had were good points. But at the same time, whenever addiction's in that lane, nothing is on the table. You know, it's just all the rules are gone, morals be damned at that point. And so that's why people, I think, have that idea that addiction is a moral standpoint. It's because of the things that a lot of people do while they're trying to get their fix, you know? It's really, really hard to make some of those amends, but the worst ones are the ones where they just go poof, you know? Because I feel like those are the ones that don't get closure, and that's what hurts.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And yeah, you have to make a living amends sometimes with some people that
hmm,
won't pick up the phone.
yeah,
Um, yeah, those were challenging.
yeah. Uh, and let's see, I have interviewed someone, and I'll have to pull up all the correct info because I don't want to mince anyone's name or information on this episode. And this is also going to be here. There's someone that I've interviewed that actually has a support group for doctors in recovery. They're just a human, kind of like I said earlier. And we need that kind of connection, but you need that connection that there's other people with that same status, you know?
Yeah,
Because for me, it's easy to go, hey, I'm so and so in this recovery meeting because everyone else probably doesn't have that status of doctor. And I mean, that has to be difficult. Do you present yourself as doctor in meetings or do you just go by Brett?
Oh yeah, no, I just go by Brett. Yeah. It's
Um,
if I'm at a meeting long enough, it gets known inevitably, but no, just definitely just Brett.
and I love that because you are sitting there and you're just human and you recognize that. But I think that it would help your recovery a little bit if you actually connected with other doctors, you know,
I agree.
because there's something that doctors share that you and I won't share because I've not been in your shoes. I've not had those same experiences. I don't know entirely what it's like to work in the medical field. I may have my CNA and phlebotomy licenses back in the past, but that's way back then, and nowhere near an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. So let me get those references for you, and I'll figure out how to pod match. Duh. But let's see. So, with your recovery journey, how many hiccups do you think you've honestly had? And by hiccups, I mean it can be anything to that first thought that you go, no, I don't want to do that. Or the hiccup of you forgot to call your sponsor whenever you really needed to, or anything like that. Do you count your hiccups?
Well, I count my relapses.
Ooh, okay.
I've had one relapse and had to go back to rehab. But I'll say this: I'm glad you asked this question too,
Mm-hmm.
because when I was in early recovery, you know, I'm I was terrified of relapse, as
Mm-hmm.
if I was going to be walking on the street and relapse was going to fall on my head and there was nothing I could do about it. Like
Yeah.
and like you said, with the choice and the addiction, you do have a choice for the very first drink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I started to fall into some of my addictive behaviors short of using.
Mm-hmm.
But I started to emotionally relapse, if you will. And I
Ooh.
knew at the time, this
Mm-hmm.
is not good.
Yeah.
And I knew it, I was conscious at the time that if I keep doing this emotionally, it's going to lead to, mental relapse, and then it's going to lead to physical relapse. So it did
Mm-hmm.
not creep up on me out of nowhere. I knew from the very first addictive behavior that I started displaying that I was heading in the wrong direction.
Um, it's really good that you brought up addictive behavior because some people think that it's only whenever you're in addiction that you do an addictive behavior, but that's not the case, right?
Ooh, no. Yeah. Not even
Uh,
close for me.
so I know an addictive behavior for me, and this is going to sound silly and stupid, but not brushing my teeth in the morning. That can be an addictive behavior right there. If I stop brushing my teeth in the morning, that means I am headed down the wrong road really quick. You know?
That's funny you say that because the one for me is making my bed.
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
Uh,
same deal.
yep. And there are little tiny things that a lot of people may not take that will take for granted. And it's kind of like anything whenever it comes to recovery. Some people may think of it all grandiose, and some people may think of it all grandiose and not notice the little nuances that really go into it. And some people know what goes into it, even though they've not been there themselves, and they support it. You know,
Yeah.
so and then there's that third tier of people who hear recovery and demonize it. So.
Yeah, it's funny, and this is, I guess, a little bit off subject, but what you just said reminded me.
Hmm.
I was a little bit taken aback when I started going to outside AA meetings. That, in my experience, I seemed to feel like a lot of the real old timers, a lot of the old school AA people, look down on rehab.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, for what it's worth for listeners, if you feel that on the outside, you know, you're not alone. I felt the same thing. And it's not a big deal. It's not a huge deal, but it was
Mhm.
definitely palpable. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it is definitely palpable. Those old timers are rough whenever it comes to their recovery, and they definitely like to think that it's their way or no way.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the case, but you can't tell them that, you know. Brett, we are almost at the end of this episode, so I do have to ask real quick, do you think that we could see you on in the future to talk about more recovery?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'm
Awesome.
a little bummed out that we're out of time already. So yeah, I'd love it.
Oh, I mean, we can keep going, but for the radio, we've got to trim it to about 58 minutes.
Yeah.
So, we can definitely keep going if you feel like it.
Well, no, let's. I think it. I don't want to lose listeners that have that kind of prepared themselves mentally for an hour. But we can
Fair
do a
enough.
part two. We can do a part two for sure.
Yes, sir. I would love one. I would love one part two. I would love a part two. There we go. I have one other question though, and this one is a little bit more important. Do you know the number that someone can call if they're having mental crisis or suicidal ideations?
I I don't.
So that number is 988.
Okay.
So if we teach our friends, if we teach our kids how to dial 911 in case of an emergency, we can teach our friends and loved ones how to dial 988 in case of a mental crisis. And for everyone out there, mental crisis, you just had a bad breakup, you just got laid off, you got to be on your report card. Any of those, you need someone to talk to, dial 988. Someone will be there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
So, Brett, this has been one heck of an episode. So, do you have any shout outs that you'd like to do? It can be for yourself, for your sponsor, anyone, organization, anything.
Um, well, I do. I will shout out a couple of nuggets of wisdom that I've been taught in my
Okay.
5 years of recovery. And a few of which I wish I would have known earlier. But one is, I love the saying that we're not responsible for our disease, but we are responsible for our recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Because that took a lot of guilt and shame away from it,
Mm-hmm.
especially in early recovery for me.
Yeah.
So whoever needs to hear that, that was a good one for me. And then another one again, and this worked for me, which is the notion that two things can be equally true at the same time. Okay, I can be a person that did terrible things when I was active in my disease, and I can also be a lovable person who does the next right thing in recovery. And those, even though I'm only one. There's only one Brett, and so it's not all or nothing. Both of those things can be true at the same time. So give yourself a break, I guess, is my point.
Yeah. You make some really, really good points because both of those are super important, especially for earlier recovery. You know, and I think that that would also go to anyone who's blah, blah, blah. I think that that would also go doubly as important for anyone that's gone through relapse themselves, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because that is one of those things that relapse does not have to be inevitable. It does not have to happen, but if it happens, it's not necessarily your fault, you know, because I'm sorry, but once you have the disease of choice, once you have the disease of addiction, it's there. It's, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, the only thing you can do from it is abstain from your DOC
Right.
and work program of recovery. So, Brett, with that, I think we are at time though.
Okay.
So, everyone out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM. This is Keegan, and we right at an hour. Okay, cool. Uh, but I want to thank you again, and Brett, we will see you back on in a couple weeks, couple months.
Okay, fantastic.
We'll figure it out. And everyone out there, be sure to check in regularly on Facebook to see when he's coming back, okay? So until next time, y'all have a good whenever it is you're listening to this. And we'll see you next time. Schlan. All right, so that was Brett and his opiate recovery. Super awesome story. So be sure to check that out on retrievingsanity.com or over on YouTube, Spotify, wherever else you listen to your podcast. And be sure to check out next episode whenever we talk to Willie, and he wants to tell us all about his intergenerational trauma, what it is, how he deals with it, and how others might be able to do the same. So thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity, and as always, much love. See you next time. Schlan.